Now, all right. All there. Right. So we're going to look at the human digestive system. It's quite complicated. There is a bit of chemistry, but I'll keep it to a minimum. And then at the end, if you looked at the notes, you will see that I included a few other animals' digestive systems. So we've got a various other digestive systems in the world besides ours. Okay, so I will now look. We have a digestive system, and when it works well and everything's good and runs as it should, it has both chemical and mechanical digestive processes, and the whole thing, whatever you put in your mouth and chew and swallow, will eventually be broken down to individual components. So that's the whole function of it. Once the components, the molecules are there, then they have to be absorbed, and that's and different types of molecules are absorbed in different parts of the system. Then we have a fantastic array of bacteria in our gut, and they call intestinal flora, intestinal flowers, but they're not animals. They're bacteria mostly. Sometimes there are viruses there as well, but they have to be maintained because for our health they have to be there. So what are the parts? Now this is a short list of the parts. There are sort of subs. Each of those have got sub areas which the talk will cover. So we have the mouth. So we have the teeth, the tongue, saliva, the esophagus that carries the food from the mouth to the stomach. The stomach is there. It's got acids, it's got enzymes. The liver, which is not directly linked to the digestive system, but it produces bile through and I'll get to that. We have another area. In fact, if you look at the diagram here, we have the tongue, the teeth. There's the pink one here behind is the esophagus. Here is the stomach. And we have the pancreas. This is the yellow bit at the back. I mean, it's at the back, they have to show us somehow, but it's there in the diagram. Here's the liver. Behind the liver, or at the bottom, is the gallbladder, part of it there. And then the small intestine, or the duodenum, is here. Okay, that's a very, very important part. Then we have a very long small intestine. Then we have a little bit called the cecum and the appendix, which you've heard about. And then we've got a fat, short section called the large intestine, then the rectum, and eventually we have the anus. So we all use every part of it, all of us, if we've got it. I've got a friend who has virtually none of this in him. It'll be taken out, so he's also got issues, but he's alive and he's happy, so that's okay. So let's start at the beginning. An ancillary organ, by the way, an ancillary gland is organs and glands that actually feed into the main area. So we produce saliva, and as I'm talking, I can feel the saliva being produced to keep my mouth moist. So my lips and my tongue work really well, and so I can actually produce the words. The enzyme that it produces, which starts the breakdown of food, is called ptyalin. It's a silent P. Ptyalin, and the enzyme is called amylase. Now, you see this right through for the next hour and a half. The ASE on the end of a word means that it's an enzyme. It breaks things down. The amyl bit also then refers to carbohydrates. So when we eat carbs, starch, for example, this amylase starts the breakdown, because starch is very, very big, made of thousands of molecules, atoms, if you like. It's very big. Then we have goblet cells. So this is in the mouth. The salivary glands are below in the lower jaw, and there's some saliva being produced too in the uvula. That's a little bit that sticks in the back, sticks down in the back of the throat, and so there's a lot of saliva produced. The goblet cells are very special cells, and they're right through the system, because what they do is produce mucus. So everything just slides down very nicely. And without the goblet cells, there'd be no mucus, would have all sorts of problems. The enzymes that digest the food that we've eaten is produced at different levels depending on what to be broken down. Some of it's produced in the stomach, some of it in the small intestine. The stomach also produces hydrochloric acid at a pH of 1. So it's pretty powerful. And if the mucus was not there, there'd be no stomach to be eaten away. And people who have ulcers, I'll come to that later, but they have problems because the acid has started eating away some of the wall of the stomach. That's another story. Then we have this great big thing called the liver. It's a cleaning thing. And in the cleaning process, cleans the blood. It picks everything up and also stores all of the sugar in the body that needs storing. Most of it's in the liver, some of it's in the muscle. But it also produces bile. And bile is essential to break down fats. It's like a detergent. I'll get to that later. Then we have the pancreas. And the pancreas is, I showed you on the diagram before, it produces quite a few very important enzymes, but we'll get to that. So let's look at the type of nutrients that we must eat. So carbohydrates. If you look at the word, I think we may have covered the last lesson, I can't remember, but carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, carbohydrates. And that's basically what they are. They're the sugars, and the starch is made up of sugars, cellulose is made up of sugars, and and when I say sugars, I don't mean just necessarily sucrose, which is a glucose and a fructose bound together. They're just part of it. There are lots of other sugars, huge numbers of sugars, depending on where they are and what they do and who produce them. But they're important. But they're all carbohydrates. Then we have proteins. Now, proteins are essential, and they're made up of amino acids. And there are 20 different amino acids that in a certain sequence produce whatever protein we need. Lipids are the fats, and they have lots of different fats, and the fatty acids and the glycerol, which holds the whole thing together. Now, the difference between fats and oils are that fats are solid, butter, if you like, and margarine. Oils are liquid. We also produce a fair bit of DNA and RNA. Excuse me. And DNA and RNA have their own specific aspects, but we have spent time on genetics before. I don't think I'll unless there's a specific question, DNA and RNA are not involved today. But if you have a look what they're made up of, they are like we have amino acids, we have nucleic acids, just different shape, and they're called the bases. They're sugars, and there's phosphate. And with that phosphate, we would have absolutely no energy. Remember the ATP is very important, but I didn't mention it today, but before we have. So let's look at the various juices that we produce right through the system. Saliva, which we all produce, otherwise we would not be able to talk, we could not eat, because you need the saliva in the when you chew some food, the saliva mixes it in and it allows the swallowing process. If your mouth is totally dry, you can't swallow. The food will not go anywhere. And it also starts to break down. Saliva's got an enzyme called ptyalin, and it starts to break down the carbohydrates into smaller molecules, and the fats that start getting broken down. The bile, which is produced in the liver, it emulsifies fats. Now, fats are very large molecules, and the emulsification process cuts them up and makes them into smaller molecules, much easier to handle. So I'll give you an example now, in case I forget later. When we talk about bile, if you have been frying something, an egg or something in a fry pan, and then you put it under the tap in the kitchen, most of the oil will stay there. You can pour hot water on it, but some fat will stay there. But if you take some soap and a sponge and move it around, the fat will then you can clean it up. Now, what soap does, it emulsifies the fat. It breaks up the fat into tiny little balls made of fat molecules. They're called mycelials, and they just wash away with the water. But they don't dissolve in water like sugar, for example. Then we have the amylases. I mentioned amylase before in the saliva. They break down carbohydrates to monosaccharides. That's a single sugar. Saccharide is the official word for sugar. And mono means a single. So glucose, one glucose molecule is a monosaccharide. Fructose is another saccharide. And if you put them together, then you get a different sugar. You can get, now, starch is made up of sugar. Cellulose is made up of sugar, 100%, but in a different sequence of different sugars and different sequence of which sugar joins up with which other sugar. Lipases, remember, so amylase ends in ASE, lipase, ASE. So they're the more modern words, the bile and saliva and so on. They're not actually enzymes. These are enzymes, they end in ASE, and they break down fats. And fats are made up of fatty acids and glycerol. And we have so many different sorts of fats depending on what they're doing. A lot of our enzymes, a lot of our hormones are made from fats. Proteases, they break down proteins into amino acids. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the word peptide. The peptide is the name of the bond that holds two amino acids together. Now, if you have a number of amino acids joined together, that's called a polypeptide. And what proteases do is break the bonds, and the polypeptides become as independent amino acids. and then we can absorb, our system will absorb the amino acids. We also have nucleases, and they break down the DNA and the RNA into its components. Now, we have a huge amount of DNA in our system, and they need to be broken down too. And everything's recycled. So it's a complicated system.
Mm-hmm.
So here's to give you an idea, here's the tongue. The tongue has a certain degree of mobility. The teeth are essential. So, and underneath here in the jaw, it's not shown, but the salivary or salivary glands are down here, and also in the uvula, this thing at the back, the little dingly thing at the back here. They also produce a fair bit of saliva. And the idea here is, and above that, is the nose. As you can see, there's very little separating the nose cavity from the mouth cavity. But this uvula is very important. So when you swallow, you cover the trachea. So you don't get food into the lungs. I think I'll leave it there. Now, I just realized that I forgot to switch off to mute you guys, so I can hear something in the background. If somebody's talking or to have a radio, please switch it off. Or telephone, I don't know what it is. Anyway, the teeth are essential. We can't speak without the teeth properly. We can't eat without teeth. And also, they're very important to the way we look. People recognize us depending on, with our teeth, the way they are. And that's why so many people spend a fortune having teeth made for them or modified so they will look in a particular way. I don't know if you know that the baby teeth, there are 20 of them, and adult teeth, there are 32. Now, most of the baby teeth are deciduous, they fall out. But as some of them stay, the molars stay behind, and then the others grow. Through evolution, things change. Our mouths, generally in the world, human mouths, are getting slightly smaller. And the teeth, there's not enough room for teeth. So I'll give you a direct example. My younger daughter had to have teeth removed so that the teeth will actually fit in her jaw. And it's very common for young kids now, and the daughter I'm talking about is 39, so she's not a young kid anymore. But even then, the process of extracting teeth to be able to, so that they will fit the teeth in the jaw space that the kids got, is quite common, very common. Anyway, so we have all these teeth for different functions. So we have the cutters and we have the chewers, the breaking down ones. But that's another story. I just put this in just to mention it. And by the way, I thought you might find this interesting when they come up. So we have sort of all the teeth. I can't remember whether I sent this one to you or not. They're just really interesting about the variability and when how the person is when these erupt and when they fall out. And the interesting thing though is teeth are living parts of tissue, our tissue. And the enamel is probably the hardest part of our tissue in the body. But it's easy to get into if you have acid. Acid will break it down. So then you have your dentine, the pulp, which is so the blood supply, and there's also a strong nerve down the bottom, which isn't shown here. And if you ever have any teeth pulled without anesthetic, you will know it. And that's because the nerve has been affected. The tongue is essential. We need it for talking, for tasting, for chewing, and swallowing. You can't swallow without your tongue. The tongue actually pushes what food, which is chewed up and mixed with saliva, the tongue pushes it back, and that's how you swallow. Then the other muscles in the esophagus take over. You can't chew without the tongue. The tongue moves the food around. Yeah, talking, impossible. And without teeth, it's very difficult to talk also. And of course, we taste with the tongue. And so we also have taste buds at the back of the throat. That's usually the bitter taste. And every taste has a different taste bud. So we know it's the sweet, the sour, the bitter, and I can't think of it. Anyway, it comes. So here we go. Oh, salt. Yeah. So sweet, sour, salt, bitter. These are the ones that's four, the ones that we knew for a long time. So there are taste buds called for umami. Now, umami is a glutamate taste. It's a savory taste. So glutamate is what in Chinese cuisine, they add glutamate to give it that savory taste experience. So tomatoes, meat, cheese, they taste that. There are also more tastes which are being looked at, but we always thought that each section of the tongue has different parts have different tastes, but it's not quite right. This is new stuff, fairly new, that all the different tastes are all over, but they are concentrated in certain areas. So the back of the throat, though, only tastes bitter. So if you ever had something bitter, some sort of medicine or something, you'll taste it at the back. You also taste it elsewhere, but weakly. The back is very strong. And that's most probably it's a safety mechanism because a lot of toxins, poisons are very bitter. And the idea is to spit it out or to vomit, because the bitter taste induces vomiting. There's also a sixth taste, they think, those who are doing the research, for the fatty taste. So, you know, you have some fish and chips, for example, or you're having a schnitzel. There is I know it's a fatty sensation, and they think there may be another type of taste bud. That's continuing on. And they also think that there are things like alkaline, and like in brine. Now, brine is very, very salty water, and if you even have it in your mouth, it'll make you throw up. But it's the opposite to sour. So the brine is sort of sour, and the acid is sour. So, for example, if you have lemon, it's very acidic. It's a sour taste. There's also, I think that there may be taste buds for a metallic taste, and then another one for water-like. And I'm not sure what that actually means, but it's there. Now, as I said, right through the tongue, there are all these different tastes, but they're concentrated in different parts of the tongue. So this diagram here is really, really nicely done. You got your umami everywhere. The sour is on the side of the tongue, the sweet in the front, the bitters at the back, and at the back of the back as well. And then the salty, there's a little bit there. Now, saliva is really, really important, as I said before. Producing the glands, the salivary glands, or some people say salivary glands, and it's mostly water. And what else is there? There's ptyalin. I mentioned it in the saliva, and that's an amylase. It breaks down starch. The carbohydrates that we eat are mostly starch, and it breaks it down into sugars. We also have salivary lipase. Now, lipase is an enzyme which breaks down fats. So fats start being broken down in the mouth. We also have lysozyme, which is an antibacterial. So if bacteria, there are some bacteria in the mouth, but you pick something up off the table and put it in your mouth, some of that certainly will have bacteria. So whatever bacteria are in there are usually cut off or broken down by the lysozyme, which is specifically for antibacterial. As an antibacterial, it works really well. We also have mucus. Now, you can't swallow if you don't have the mucus, as I mentioned before. But it's when you have a piece of bread and you chew it, it goes round and round and round. While you're doing it, it's covered in saliva. Saliva's got the mucus. So then it's slippery enough to be able to be chewed. To be swallowed. Now, as soon as it leaves the mouth, when it's in the esophagus going down, it changes its name. It's called a bolus. The bolus is a little ball, if you like, of chewed food. The little dangly bit at the back is called a uvula. And it has also connective tissue. It's got its own glands. It's got some muscles in it. And the main purpose is to secrete saliva. The secretion is saliva, and it moistens the mouth and the throat. So a lot of saliva comes from the back as well as from under the jaw. And it's also important in eating and drinking. So I don't know if you know the difference between the soft palate and the hard palate. If you stick your tongue up to the roof of your mouth, that's the hard palate. Go a bit further back. You can't do it with your tongue. And don't do it, please. I don't want you throwing up. But if you put your finger in and you can feel the soft palate back there. If you touch that, that'll give you a very strong reaction, and you probably throw out at breakfast. Okay, so the uvula is part of it's next to the soft palate, just behind there, and it's all part of the swallowing process. And it prevents the food going up into the nose, and also prevents the food or the bolus going into the lungs. Now, I don't know if you've heard in your life when you sometimes you start coughing, and you cough and you cough, and you were drinking something like water, it could be anything, and then it comes out through your nose. That's when things going a little bit awry, but under normal circumstances, nothing goes in the wrong place. We have this mechanism called peristalsis. the bolus, as soon as it's swallowed, control of it is taken over by a system of contractions which deliver the bolus to the stomach. And this system is called peristalsis. So what it is, the esophagus has got two types of muscles. It's got circular muscles, which is a short tube from there to the top of the stomach, about that long. And it's got circular muscles which squeeze, and it's got longitudinal muscles. So they work together. So the circular muscle, as it squeezes, and the two muscles, the longitudinal one, pull down, and the next set of circular muscles contract, and the next one, the next one, next one, next one. So the whole thing is like you take this pencil, for example, say it's a rubber tube, with your finger, squeeze it down, and that's exactly what peristalsis, that's the squeezing part, does to the food to get it down there into the stomach. Okay, so the two types of muscles, circular and longitudinal, and they work together. And of course, if you're vomiting, the reverse happens. So the two layers work together to get the bolus into the stomach. And I've said that. So here's a diagram. So you've got the muscles which squeeze at the top. There's the bolus. And then as it moves down, that part squeezes and squeezes, but the longitudinal part actually pushes it down into the stomach, and then it relaxes further back. Now, the stomach is very complex. It's got 3 layers of smooth muscle. And I should mention that these are also smooth muscle. The difference between smooth muscle and striated muscle, this is very important. Striated muscles are the ones that make us move. Move my arm, it's smooth muscles. They're striated and they get tired. So if you pick up a 10-kilo weight and you're doing a few curls with it, you might be able to do 10, you may be able to do 5, whatever. Your muscles will get tired. On the other hand, right through our bodies, we have this second group of muscles called smooth muscles, and they never get tired, and they squeeze all the time. So, for example, your anus, you don't want that relaxing, but it's got smooth muscle which keeps it tight, and when you're sitting on the toilet to release your feces, they relax. The brain it gives the signal, okay guys, relax. So what happens in the stomach, the 3 layers of muscles, but each in a different direction, and we've got some feedback there somewhere. Oh, I wonder whether they should start again. Okay, the 3 layers of the 3 layers of not sure what to do. Can someone move?
Ruben, why don't you mute everybody?
What's that? Thank you. I'm getting feedback. So, okay. So, the three muscles are, there's one direction, another direction, and at an angle. I think we'll have to stop the talk, switch off everything. Yeah. Can everybody mute themselves? Thank you, Preeti. Thank you. Can everyone please mute themselves? All right, I can do it. All right, I think we're mute now. What was the saying? Okay, the three layers of muscles. So we have the two layers which are perpendicular to each other, right angles. And then there's another layer that's at an angle to them, about 45 degrees. And so they can actually squeeze away. And then the stomach does a huge amount of squeezing, making sure everything in the muscle gets squeezed and broken down and mixed with the enzymes and the other liquids that are there. And also there are sphincters. Now someone hasn't. Hang on, who hasn't? I don't know. So the top of the stomach, there's a sphincter, like the anus. It's a little round muscles, and it squeezes. And then because it's near the heart, it's called the cardiac sphincter, and that stops regurgitation. So when the stomach's squeezing away, it doesn't come up again. When that relaxes, that's how vomit comes up. The other sphincter is down the other end of the stomach. It's called the pyloric sphincter, and then it opens and closes when the material inside the stomach is just right for what's happening further down, and it opens a little bit and it squeezes out, and then it actually squirts out of the stomach. So all these 5 different muscles are all smooth muscles, and they never get tired. So here's a diagram, a very good diagram of the stomach. This is the cardiac sphincter here. Here's a cutaway of the sphincter, so it's circular there. You can see here the 3 layers of muscles, the longitudinal, the circular, and the oblique. And inside, you've got these folds. And inside the folds are many different, many and varied glands. Some produce acid, some produce enzymes. It's complicated. Okay, so if you can imagine these 3 muscle layers, and the whole thing just keeps on squeezing and moving things around. In order to keep everything safe inside the stomach, there are cells called goblet cells. You can see one here, the 1, 2, 3, 4 here, another 4 here, and they produce mucin. It's a protein which when it's produced, and there's water in the stomach, of course, it becomes mucus. And that protects the lining of the stomach. Why? Because we produce hydrochloric acid at a pH of about 1. And if the mucus was not there, it would eat the muscle away. And then there's an enzyme called pepsin that the stomach wall produces, and that starts the digestion of proteins. And again, if the mucus wasn't there, the pepsin would eat, together with the hydrochloric acid, the stomach away. Not good. So I put this in. This is fascinating. There are some gastric problems, but we use we need a vitamin called vitamin B12, and we can't produce red blood cells without it. Now, there's the stomach produces a protein, a separate protein called the intrinsic factor. I have no idea where that name came from, but that's what it's called. And when we eat, and there's vitamin B12 in the food, the intrinsic factor latches on to the B12 molecules, and that and this intrinsic factor then carries the B12 out of the stomach into the blood vessels of the stomach. Now, if there's a problem with the production of intrinsic factor, the vitamin B12 won't be absorbed. And if you can't absorb the vitamin B12, you can't make red blood cells. And it's a separate sort of anemia, and it's called pernicious anemia. And it's fatal. Also, I'm sure you've heard of gastric ulcers, duodenal ulcers, and it was always thought a long, long, long time that the acids and something else was eating away the mucus and then eating a hole in the stomach. And back in 1982, which seems a long time ago, it was discovered that the Helicobacter pylori has been linked to these ulcers. And that was identified by two Australian scientists, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, and they actually got the Nobel Prize in Physiology. Well, it's called Physiology or Medicine. That's what the Nobel Prize is, in 2005. And Barry Marshall, he actually tested this by swallowing the pylori bacteria, producing some ulcers in his stomach. Then he took the appropriate antibiotics, and he was magically healed. So this is what scientists often do. They test on themselves, and it works. So these days, gastric and duodenal ulcers are very rare. Well, they exist, but with particular antibiotics, they're cleared quickly. So from the stomach, do you remember when we've chewed up the food in the mouth and swallowed it, the name of the material changed from food to chyme. In the stomach, the chyme is modified and it's released, and then it's called a bolus. And the food now is different, very different, and it moves into the small intestine, about 7 meters. The small intestine is about 7 meters long, and the 3 parts to it. They all do something different. The first short part, it's called the duodenum, then the jejunum, and the ileum. So, so there's the chyme that comes out of the stomach. Are mixed with the enzymes and the bile. Now, the bile comes from the gallbladder, which is part of the liver, into the duodenum, mixes it, and it starts the digestion process. So far, up to the stomach, was breaking everything down into usable sizes. So the chyme is mixed with the bile, and the bile, as I said before, breaks down fats. So here's the stomach, the pyloric sphincter. This short bit here is the duodenum. Then we have the small intestine, the jejunum, and the ileum further down. It's similar to what we saw before, and the large intestine with ascending, transverse, and descending colon, the rectum, and the anus. Now, this yellow one here, they've dropped it for the diagram. It's actually about there. The pancreas, the gallbladder has been dropped. Also, and there's the bile duct, and they come together. So notice here that the tube that comes from the gallbladder and the tube that comes from the pancreas coming together into the duodenum, and all sorts of magical things happen along there. Now, the duodenum has very specific sensors, and they can identify all sorts of substances. They can identify microorganisms as well. They can macronutrients are very large molecules, and micronutrients, much smaller ones, and proteins. And so it also has what they call the lingual taste. That's the tongue tastes. So the 5 basic tastes are also picked up in the duodenum, and also whatever other nutrients are there, and also unwanted chemicals. And then these sensors send messages to the different parts of that system to produce the digestive liquids to digest whatever is coming through. So it's not everything, you don't throw everything at it to do it. So very specific. So the sensors alert the brain, so about what's coming through the intestines, and then you get the movement of the chyme is, as it moves, specific enzymes and various fluids come through to release, to break them down into tiny little parts of the nutrients, which are then absorbed. So, for example, if you eat something that has absolutely no fat in it, the sensor that picks up fat doesn't pick it up because it's not there. So no bile will come in. You don't want to waste bile if there's no need for it. That's sort of an example. So the biliary system, this is the production of bile. It's so important. So we have the liver, and this is sort of inside it somewhere. It's bile, by the way, used to be called gall, and that's what's called the gallbladder. That's the old name for it. And so the bile is actually produced in the liver, and it's really a lot of breakdown products of old things like red blood cells that are no longer used, bits of cholesterol, all sorts of things, including bicarbonates, just stuff that the body doesn't need anymore but can use to break the fats down. So it's just stored there. We all have it. So when fats, oils enter the duodenum, message sent to the brain and then to the gallbladder, squeezes the bile duct. So this is squeezed, and then you get a squish out some into there, depending on how much there is. And then the duodenum starts, so in the duodenum, you start the emulsification process. So bile acts as a detergent, is what I said before. It breaks the fats down into small globules, and they are digested further down by lipase. I mentioned lipases before. They are the enzymes that break fats into fatty acids and glycerol. And these fatty acids and glycerol and then absorb not into the blood, but into the lymphatic system. The blood doesn't carry them, the lymph does, in the villi, which we'll get to shortly. Now, sometimes you get gallstones in the gallbladder, and people can have them for years without any problems if they're really like little grains of sand. But sometimes they come together and they get bigger and bigger, and then they block the bile duct. The person gets really sick, and the gallbladder has to be removed. Now, the person will still produce bile, but in the liver, but without the gallbladder, you get a constant flow of bile. Okay? And that I think it's called cholecystectomy, which is a removal of the gallbladder. For the pancreas, now it's got two functions. It functions as an endocrine gland. It produces hormones and it produces enzymes. So what it looks like, it's along there behind the stomach. Remember, here's the bile duct, and that's from the pancreatic duct, and they're coming to the duodenum there. So the endocrine and the exocrine functions, the endocrines refer to hormones, exocrines to enzymes. So the two endocrine products in the pancreas are insulin, which you've all heard of, and some of you may even be using, and glucagon. I'll get to that in a half a sec. And as an exocrine gland, it also produces the digestive enzymes. Okay, so endocrine, the hormones, exocrine are the enzymes. So this is where glucose control in the body comes in. Insulin and glucagon are both produced in the pancreas, and these are the endocrine products, and they're both involved in the regulation of our blood sugar levels. Insulin is produced by the beta cells, the two sorts of cells, and they're called alpha and beta, and in the pancreas. So when the amount of blood glucose is rising too high, the body, the brain sends a message to the beta cells. We need some insulin. The insulin is produced, goes into the system, and it goes basically directly to two places, two types of tissue: the liver cells and the muscle cells, the striated muscles, the muscles that we move with. And they both absorb the glucose that is in excess in the blood. And so the liver and the muscle cells absorb them, and they produce and they store them. Now the glucagon does the opposite. When when the blood sugar levels drop for some reason, or you may be exercising, or you may be under high stress, very high stress, and using up your sugars, your glucose, the glucagon the alpha cells are stimulated to produce glucagon, which which then increase the blood sugar levels. They go to the liver. The glucagon is sent to the liver. The signals there for the breakdown of the sugar storage, the glucose storage, and goes into the bloodstream, and the levels rise. In the small intestine, we have this little finger-like projections, and they're called villi. The singular is villus, and right through. And the villi themselves have microvilli on top of them. And what they do, they increase the surface area a huge amount. So you get a rapid absorption of the nutrients that have been digested. So here's an example. This is we have the layers within the intestines, layers of muscles, right, underneath the yellow bit. And here we have these little finger-like projections, like that. They're using the same color code here. And each villus, each one of these is a villus, it's got two things in it. The red and the blue are blood vessels, capillaries. The red is the incoming, and the blue is the outgoing. And the yellow is the lymphatic system. It's called the lacteal. And any fat absorbed goes into there, and amino acids and sugars go into the blood. Right? And on top of the villi, there are these little microvilli. So you get the absorption very, very, very fast. So this is a microscopic photo. Just shows you it's been the split open just a little bit. But this is what they're like, and there are millions of them. All right. What happens with fat? You got a blob of fat, and the lipase is the enzyme. Remember, it's ASE that breaks fat down. But sorry. So in the gut, in the small intestine, the fat gets surrounded by the lipase, and the things in the bile which actually start breaking it down. And then they break down and break down and break down until they end up with single molecules of fat, and they form this little round star-like things called micelles. And then the micelles are small enough to go into the lacteals. They get broken down even further. And once they're in the lacteal, which I showed you here, they would go in to the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is a separate system until it gets to the heart, and it joins in the into the vena cava and into the blood. So the liquid is not lost, and then through that it goes through the body. And the fat goes to the liver and gets stored and whatnot. Okay, so that's how that part works. So these are just a simple diagram in the mouth, and this is about the enzymes. And these are the amylases. So the carbohydrates that we eat in the mouth, we have what's called salivary or salivary alpha amylase. And it breaks the carbs down to polysaccharides. Now, a saccharide is a sugar, usually glucose. And polysaccharides are very long chains of them. Then we have other sugars called dextrins, the sucrose. Now, sucrose, for example, is one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose together. Lactose, maltose, there are many, many more sugars. Nothing happens to them in the stomach. In the small intestine, in the pancreas, they produce alpha amylase, and the monosaccharides. This is from the pancreas, not hormone. I mentioned there are two hormones that the pancreas produces, but it also produces amylase to break these down to monosaccharides. So glucose, galactose, fructose, these are the various single sugars, which these are all multiple combinations of those sugars. In the intestinal lining, the monosaccharides, they're these guys here, they go, sorry, these are the fats. The same process. The monosaccharides means a single sugar like glucose or fructose, then go into the intestine, into the blood, like this. But this diagram is for DNA and RNA. It also gets broken down. DNA is big, they get broken down into sort of dipeptides and single amino acids. By the way, a dipeptide is just two amino acids, and it's the bond that holds two amino acids together is called a peptide bond. So you have two, doesn't matter which two amino acids, there are 20 of them, 20 different ones. Any two together is a dipeptide. You get a string of them, it's called a polypeptide. And then they go through and go into the bloodstream, through the lining. So here you villi, and it often goes into the blood system. Once they're in there, this is just that in a different diagram. So the nucleotides are really the aspects that make up DNA, and they move in and out. But some of you may like this more than the others. The nucleic acids, as I said, there are 20 of them, and they make up our DNA. I put this third diagram in here. I wasn't sure where to put it in. Is called banding, stomach banding. So someone who's quite large, obese, and has problems controlling their diet, or the body just needs control of incoming food. There's a process called banding, where they put a band, so the stomach, instead of being the whole lot, it's just that bit there. So the person can only eat a little bit at a time, and then they feel full. So they don't eat anywhere near as much. Now, I've got a brother younger than me. He's quite obese. And years ago, he had a banding done, and that worked very well. But over the years, he's learned that he still, stops off for a Mars bar. Banding works if you control your eating habits, and even if you can't control them, you can't eat much. It depends on what you eat as well. Now the villi, let's go into some detail here. The glucose and amino acids when they're absorbed into the blood from the villi, they go directly to the liver. And there's a system in our bodies called the hepatic portal vein. So it's a vein which picks up all the nutrients that have been absorbed directly to the liver, nowhere else, straight to the liver. So it's mainly the glucose that's the problem. So, this is what I just said. So fatty acids, glycerol, they absorb into the lymph. That's the second bit. Okay. So first of all, the hepatic portal vein, I'll come back to it. I should have done this the other way. The lymph in the lacteals and so on, and then they go into the system, into the heart, I mentioned. And so this is basically what I said before. Water, vitamins, and minerals, they just go through the colon, the large intestine wall. They go right through to the large intestine, they're absorbed there. The hepatic portal system is very, very important. So as the nutrients get absorbed in the system, the glucose has to go straight to the liver where it's stored. And if for some reason someone is born, how shall I say? All right, a child is born and the hepatic portal system isn't connected properly, and the glucose that's absorbed in the intestine just moves around the body, that person, that baby, will be in permanent he'll be fainting the whole time. The brain cannot support a large quantity of glucose. If you have a lot of glucose, a lot of sugar, you even get what's called a high. But when you're eating, say, bread, any carbohydrate, pasta, rice, there's a massive amount of glucose, massive, and it has to be stored and then released slowly. And the only way that can be, so it doesn't affect the brain, the only way it can do it is through this hepatic means liver, and the portal means the port. It carries it to the liver, and it's stored there. So the glycogen is the glucose is stored as glycogen for future use. It can't be stored as glucose. Now, if I haven't got the time to talk about the osmosis that is caused by glucose. If the liver only stored glucose as glucose, it would burst after the first time. The liver would just burst. The cells would burst because all the water, a lot of water will be drawn in through osmosis and go. But if you join all these glucose molecules into one massive molecule, it does not have does not produce an osmotic pressure. So the water is not absorbed, is not attracted to the liver in a large amount. It's perfectly normal. And again, it's because of this hepatic portal system, which is an amazing invention. Without it, we would die within a day or two of birth. So it basically stops the brain receiving a high concentration of glucose. If too much glucose in the system, it's called hyperglycemia. Glyce is the sugar, the eme is the blood. Okay? Too much blood sugar, no good. Oops. Have a look at some nutrients, some information. the amount of energy, that's kilojoules per gram, that's stored in the food we eat. So in carbohydrates, so any of the carbs, the sugars, the breads, the cakes, whatever we eat, every gram can produce 17 kilojoules. Proteins, the same, 17 kilojoules. Fats, 37 kilojoules per gram. Alcohol, 30. So if you drink alcohol, a little bit every now and then, not a problem. But people who drink a lot, they have obviously excessive amount of energy available, and it's usually stored as fat or other things. Fiber is really good to eat because it fills you up, and very little energy is produced there. So this is, you've all seen this sort of table before. So fruit and vegetables mostly to be eaten, breads, cereals, and potato. Yeah, it's good. Milk and dairy, fatty and sugar foods, minimal, meat, fish, and alternatives, a bit less. And that comes into that area. And the number of kilojoules that are burnt by a 70 kilogram person, if you're walking at 3.5 kilometers per hour, you're using about 1,000 kilojoules. At 5 kilometers per hour, 1,300. If you're swimming at 22 meters per minute, you're producing 1,100. You're using 1,100. If you're swimming slowly at 45 minutes, if you're swimming much faster at 45 meters per minute, you're using 2,000 per hour. And gardening, with moving around, carrying things, bending over, lifting things, is 1,276. This, of course, depending also on gardening. And just to give you an idea of what these kilojoules are, to heat 1 liter of water by 80 degrees, say your tap water might be 20 degrees, you want to boil it up, to add 80 degrees to it, you use 334 kilojoules to boil the water. So from 20 to 100. And if some of you are still using the old currency, I've added this, that 1 calorie, large C calorie, is equivalent to 4.2 kilojoules. Moving down the small intestine, we get to the cecum and the appendix. And they're both very important digestive organs in certain animals, which are called hind gut fermenters. I'll come to them a little bit later, like horses, for example. And that they're full of bacteria that break down cellulose and so on. In humans, over the millions of years that we've stopped just eating grass, or just vegetable material, we've lost the use of the cecum, which is this tiny bit here, whereas in our other animals it's huge, and the appendix. So we've got all these, we have lots of vestigial items, organs, if you like, around the body. For example, I'll give you 2 examples quickly. If it's cold and you end up with goosebumps. Now, goosebumps are caused by tiny little muscles attached to the hairs of your body. And when it's cold, they contract because birds and animals with fur have the same muscle, which attaches to the base of the feather or the base of the hair of the animal. And when it's cold, it lifts it up, catches air, and acts as an insulator. Our hair is useless for that sort of purpose, but we still have that muscle. So that's a vestigial muscle. There are other muscles in the ear. Our predecessors, the animals who came before us, have capacity to move their ears about. We still have those muscles, but we've lost the ability to use them. So if you've got a dog or a cat, you can see the ears moving about. That's vestigial. They had a purpose once. Yeah. Sorry, Arthur, were you asking something?
Yes. What is the function of the spleen?
I'm sorry, say it again.
The function of the spleen in the digestive system.
The spleen.
Yeah. Does it also produce digestive juices?
No, it stores blood.
Now, I've had a splenectomy. My spleen has been removed.
Yeah.
What happens to that function now where the blood is not in the spleen?
It's spread around the body. The spleen, from memory, I haven't thought about this for a long time, but it hang on, I'll ask our doctor friend, Richard, the spleen. Yes, okay. Richard couldn't link in, so he's listening to me on my mobile. And Richard said, yeah, we can live without it, and its function has been taken over by the bone marrow.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Did I repeat that, Richard? Okay, good.
Thanks.
We have multifunctional video here. Okay. I was going to say, oh yes. So the latest thing, I remember hearing somewhere or reading somewhere some time ago, and I found it that they now think that the appendix may have some value to us as in our immune system. They don't know what yet, but there seems to be a link because of the types of cells in there. Now, I don't know if you know, if anyone goes down to Antarctica to stay there for a while, they get their appendix removed, whether they need to or not, because a burst appendix can kill them if they're not removed in time. So there was a doctor there a little while ago, maybe 10 years ago. She didn't have her appendix removed, and she got appendicitis, and she had to remove her appendix. So she asked someone there to help her remove her own appendix, and she survived to tell the tale. All right, now let's the large intestine. Just going back. So here's the small intestine, the ileum, the last bit coming in. That part, the cecum and the appendix there, and then from there on is, you see in this diagram here, you get this going up, the ascending, transverse, and descending. We'll come back anyway. So the colon itself, the large intestine, is about 1.5 meters long. It's got a number of very important functions. So one, it absorbs water. It absorbs vitamins, for example, vitamin K, and which is, by the way, it's essential for the clotting of blood, and minerals. So minerals, talk about sodium, potassium, chloride, those sorts of things, metals. It's got a huge population of intestinal flora, and they're the bacteria. There are more bacteria in number, many times more, than we have cells in our bodies. And these bacteria mostly break down cellulose. And they, in the breakdown process, there are many vitamins in the vitamin B group. And they actually produce the vitamin B group vitamins as their waste products while they're reproducing. Now, the chyme, remember, that's the material that comes out of the stomach. Once it gets, it goes through this whole process and it gets to the rectum, it's stored, and we call that feces. So here we have the cecum and appendix. Here's the ascending, transverse, and descending colon, and then it goes down, up a bit, and then down, and that's the rectum down here. And this is called a sigmoid. It looks like an S-shaped colon. And so if you've ever had a colonoscopy, so the doctor has to come in and go down and up and looks around. Now the rectum, it acts as a temporary storage area for feces. And here is the anus, sorry, the anal sphincter is here. Remember the smooth muscle, so the smooth muscle is sealed. It doesn't get tired, and you can release it through action of your brain. You tell it to release when you're ready. So the rectal walls can expand to, depending on how much is in there, and there are receptors, which, as the wall expands, the receptors get stretched, and this stretching process sends a message to the brain that the rectum is getting filled, and then initially you feel it, but after a while, as it fills more and more, the sensation gets stronger, and then your desire to defecate, to have a crap, gets stronger. And if you don't go to the toilet because you can't, or you're too busy or whatever, apparently then material in the rectum goes back into the colon, water gets removed from it, and then it goes back in, but it becomes drier. And then eventually you get quite badly constipated if you don't remove it. Anus, by the way, comes from the Latin ring or circle. With that, it's a sphincter. We've got sphincters around the body. Even our what's the word? Our eyes, it can get larger and smaller. There's a sphincter there. The pupil, so we've got them everywhere. So it's all smooth muscle. So and there's a lot of mucus is produced just inside the anus to help with the passing of the feces. Now, the main composition of our feces is bacteria, living, non-living, a bit of water, some food material, especially some fiber that wasn't digested, intestinal cells that have been sloughed off, we just keep shedding all the time, and you want to be replacing them, and all sorts of other material. And it's really to remove waste and toxic materials from the body. And some time ago, I think the University of Bristol someone there came up with a stool chart. Now, stools is another word for feces. So if they're hard little lumps like nuts here, they're called type 1. And you can go through each of these. I think I put these in the notes, this table, and you get a whole lot until it becomes a type 7, which is entirely liquid. So there's a so medically, it's probably important to be able to pass on information to doctors about what's going on inside, and this gives them some information. Now, what sort of gastrointestinal problems can we have? Vitamin deficiencies. We can have mineral deficiencies. These are not being absorbed, or we're not eating them. There are sorts of sensitivities like lactose. Lactose is the sugar that's found in milk. OSE refers to sugar. Gluten, it's another molecule that people are sensitive to, and that's in wheat. It's found in wheat, in barley, in some grains. So we have people who are celiacs, who which is genetically caused, and if you eat gluten, it reacts and the villi disappear, which means those people cannot absorb food, or sorry, the nutrients well. So I've got 2 celiacs in my family, one of my sons-in-law and his son. And by the way, today, and when they discovered from my son-in-law that he was celiac, he had a gastroscopy, and they went into a tube down. They went into the small intestine, and he had no villi. They were all gone. He was as thin as a rake. And once they discovered that, he went on a diet of no gluten, gluten-free everything. When my grandson was born, they tested him, and there are 2 genes that could be involved, and they tested, and he had one of them. So he's a celiac too. So when they have birthday parties at school, for example, and parents bring, or whatever happens, they always are very aware. This is the King David School, that Rafi is a celiac and he can't eat what the others eat. So they always bring something special for him. Every Friday, they make blessings on the bread and the wine and the candles at school, and they have a piece of challah. For him, they give him a gluten-free bagel. So they look after them. But it's really, really serious stuff. FODMAPs, one of my daughters, and we think the second one also is affected by FODMAP. It stands for fermentables. So these are aspects that they are sensitive to. So food plus stuff that can ferment. Oligosaccharides, they are saccharides which are bigger than 100 molecules big. Disaccharides are 2 monosaccharides, two sugars. Like so, sucrose is the normal white sugar that we put into cakes or coffee. Is made of 1 glucose and 1 fructose, so it's got 2 monosaccharides. So 1 glucose is a monosaccharide. Polyols are saccharides with a hydroxyl group on them, which makes them like an alcohol. That's where the OL comes on the end. And therefore, so Monash University has got a whole section in its medical department where people go in and get treated with FODMAP. And my older daughter, she's now 43, she's had it for a few years, and when Monash came, they definitely sorted out what the problem is, and she knows what she can eat, she knows what she can't eat, and it's all good. But it's all, this is FODMAP's all recently fairly new. Now, we also have lots of different enzymes. So in a little table I put together, food types, the carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and DNA. We eat a lot of DNA in our food. The enzymes that break it down, at least I won't go through them all. You can read them. I can tell you how they work, but no need to do. So there's the enzyme and where they find the salivary gland, pancreas, small intestine, and so on, and the products in the salivary gland, it's maltose, pancreas is maltose, and small intestine, glucose, and so on. Peptides, and don't forget peptides. A peptide bond is a bond that holds two amino acids together. So a peptide is like two amino acids. Polypeptides are large. Fats, you get fatty acids and glycerol, and the glycerol is the thing that holds the fatty acids together and makes them different. And then you get the nucleic acids in the DNA, and there are four. Actually, there are five because of RNA as well. Yeah. And the digestive of the source of these enzymes. So these two tables are slightly different, but they're similar enough. I'll just move through at a time. So other digestive systems, I just picked 6 different organisms just to show you the different systems. A protist pro is first. So the first animals, they're animals because they don't have a cell wall, which would make it a plant. So an amoeba, for example, there are lots of animals or organisms, if you like, are like this. Everything that our bodies do, they do, all within the one cell. So the main food is bacteria, the senses here, and they wrap themselves up, and that's called amoeboid action. And then they form a little cyst like that. Enzymes are put in there, and lysosome is the little globule that has the enzymes. It matches up with that to come together and breaks down the bacterium into its processes. It absorbs the good stuff, and then this bubble, if you like, would come and join up with the wall, and it releases what's left over. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's a very simple thing, but very complicated at the same time, and everything has to work just right. Something a bit bigger, the coelentrates. The C, or the word, the first bit, is a cavity or a hollow. So if you have a jellyfish, they have this, they're mainly hollow. They have a mouth. They're called now sea jellies, by the way, rather than jellyfish. And so they ingest food, it's broken down inside there, and then the leftovers are released. Whereas things like polyps, like coral, they also have tentacles, like the sea jellies. They catch things that swim past or float past, digest them. It's all open here. Everything's open. It's a cavity, and that's where the seal comes from, the coelentrates. And they pump the digestive enzymes into there, and once it's basically done, they'll release it. Echinoderms, like sea stars or starfish is the old name. The echinos comes from hedgehog because they have little prickles on them. What's interesting here is the mouth is underneath. There's the stomach, and there's the anus. It's all one unit there. Whatever they've eaten is broken down to some degree there. It continues down and then it comes back through there and it's released. The leftovers. The green things here are their gonads, their testes or their ovaries. But this is a different system again. Birds have a mouth, an esophagus, and they have a crop. Now, whatever they eat goes through the crop. When they're fairly young, they swallow small pebbles. The crop is very muscular. And when there's food that comes in, the crop squeezes, and then that crushes up the seeds or whatever they've eaten. Could be a worm, whatever it is, crushed up, moves into the stomach. Now, the gizzard is another area which has also got endocrine functions. And then it goes into the intestine, and then it's released. Now, birds, by the way, if you look at bird dropping, you'll see a white splotch and a dark bit. The white part is uric acid. Okay, it's not water soluble, whereas we produce urea, which is water soluble. And the dark splotch inside the uric acid is the leftover of their food. Now, it's important to realize why they produce uric acid, because they conserve a lot of water by making sure that their feces don't contain water. Okay, it's all part of the survival aspect. Cows have a foregut. They actually have 4 components to their stomach. And if you look at the arrows, the green they eat, it goes into this first chamber here called the rumen, where they ruminate. It starts getting broken down. From there, it gets pushed in. I don't understand the mechanism how it selects which way to go, but it does. It's called the reticulum. From there, it goes back into the mouth, where they chew the cud a bit more. Then it goes into the what's called into the omasum. That's why it's the final bit, and into the abomasum. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, and that's where most of it's digested. And here it's down the intestine. It's absorbed. A very complex system. That's called foregut fermenters. And the fermentation produces a lot of gas, mainly methane. And in New Zealand, they have a tax on the number of cows for the amount of methane they produce. Horses have a hindgut like us. So they have an esophagus, stomach way back here, small intestine, but the cecum is very large, and that's where the most of the fiber is cellulose is digested, and then the rest is the same. That's called the hindgut. So you got a foregut and a hindgut there, and we finish off. I haven't talked about constipation, but the large coffee and 3 bran muffins, hopefully, to go. And that brings us to the end. There's a huge amount there. I hope you're okay with that and enjoy that. And you got something out of it. Hopefully you remember some of it.
Fantastic, thank you. Ruben, I just heard just on the radio that it's better to add salt to coffee rather than sugar. That brings up the sweet flavor. They suggested to add salt instead of sugar to cup of coffee. Salt, yeah, to cup of coffee. That brings the sweet flavor. That's what I heard.
They bring the flavor out a bit more.
Yeah, the flavor out, yeah.
I-
Anyway.
I have coffee without sugar, so I'm not quite sure.
So I don't have coffee at all. So,
Oh, you're missing something.
well, not really. Yeah, but
There's a lot to absorb, but you've got all the information anyway. But does anyone have any questions, any issues, anything?
Where does the bladder fit in, Ruben?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, Richard liked it.
very
There
much.
you go. I'm bringing him up to date. Richard says it's been 50 years since he's done this work
Yeah,
at university.
exactly.
He's an endocrinologist, not an
Oh,
gastroenterologist.
Okay.
So-
that's
If you have any questions for endocrinology, for a skin doctor, we've got a retired. But you've been retired 17? Oh, I've been retired 15 or 16. Yeah. But I miss the teaching a lot, and I really get a buzz talking to you guys. So
mm. And I'm just curious, Ruben, about the digestion of insects. How is that insect digestion?
insects, I'll put it in next time. Insects actually, what they usually have liquid.
Okay.
So they liquefy somehow, or they have the liquid. Insects like what are they called? Like the ones that eat leaves,
Okay.
that chew it up in their mouth and then they swallow it.
Mhm.
What happens? Also, their feces, insect feces, are not like ours. They're tiny little dry pellets, like little spots.
Mhm.
You may have seen them if you have a fly or two in the house. You may find like a full stop on page, and it's just everything is used up, and what can't be used is evacuated, and
Mhm.
has virtually no water in it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Because we are very dependent on water.
Yeah, thanks. It's really
And
complex, very complex.
It is. We are complex.
Very
Well,
complex.
they all are. They all are.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else I can add to it at the moment.
No, that's okay.
So, if anyone else
Very
is,
good.
yeah. Basil, are you all right?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I was just looking at my profile here. I was going to ask you, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Really?
How does the bladder fit in? You didn't talk about the bladder and the muscles.
That's a very good question. The bladder actually is not part of the digestive system. And the bladder gets its material, its urine, from the kidneys. So the blood goes through the kidneys. The kidneys clean the blood, that take a lot of waste out of it, and that becomes a urine.
Right.
And just like the rectum, it's got stretch receptors. So as you get more and more feces in our rectum, it stretches, and that's to say, hey, we've got to go. The same thing happens with the bladder. It's fairly small to start with, but it's got a fair bit of give, and it's got stretch receptors. And as more and more urine goes in, it doesn't stop. It's 24/7. It gets to the stage where you say, "Oh, I've got to go," and you don't because you're busy or you can't. It becomes the stretch more and more, and becomes painful after a while, and you've got to go. And you think, well, if someone doesn't go, it'll burst. He said, no. Then the brain takes over and just opens a sphincter, and you have a piss wherever you are. And it doesn't matter where. You've got to go. When you've got to go, you've got to go. And the body looks after itself.
Good, thank you.
But
Hmm.
with respect to the rectum, it doesn't open up the same way. But you end up getting clogged up. More water is removed.
And how come that some people are more susceptible to constipation than others? You know,
Maybe they don't go to the toilet enough, or they don't drink enough.
okay.
Or they don't eat fiber enough.
Oh, yes, that's probably it.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you very much.
More people. Let me just give you a couple of dates. Helene and I were talking at the beginning that next Friday, not this week, but next Friday is the last day of semester 1 for U3A. Then there's a 2-week break. Yeah. And then semester 2 starts on the 10th of July. I'll send these email. I'll send these out to you.
Good.
And then the next biology lesson, because we're going up to Queensland for my 75th birthday. The whole family's coming up. So I'll be away and I'll be missing one lesson on the 25th of July.
All right.
No, hang on.
No.
Yeah,
Thank
25th.
you.
Yeah. So I won't see you until. No, wait a minute, that's not right. So the
Yes.
next lesson, sorry, I'll be back.
25th.
The next lesson is the 25th of July.
Correct. That's better.
So take 14 away from that. So the 11th is, I'll be away. Yeah.
Well, have a good rest, and you don't have to worry about
Thank you
us.
very much. Thank
No,
you.
I'm just saying, I miss you guys, but you know, family.
No, that's fine. You deserve a good holiday.
Yeah, and happy 75th.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Happy
you. I'll
75th.
see you after the event.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
Happy
great time.
birthday.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye.
Okay,
everyone.
take care. Enjoy. Read the notes. There'll be questions next time.
Oh,
Okay.
good. There should be.
I will stop now.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.